Janice comes to us from Northern California, where she lives with her husband, Dr. Steve. And most days you will find her at the Eureka Adventist Christian School. Oh, Wairika. Oh, goodness. Wairika. Thank you for clarifying that. I'm sorry. Where she is a secretary registrar, so we know basically she runs a school, right? Yes. And she also teaches drama there. She also regularly performs and produces in the community theater, don't you? That's awesome. But her passion is really in writing and performing for schools, churches, and women's retreats, where she portrays a variety of characters, such as Hannah, Martha. Am I doing good? Noah's wife, John the Baptist's mother, and Mary. And today we're going to have the privilege of also being introduced to Rahab, and I'm really excited about that. So join me in welcoming Janice Nelson.
How many of you used to be 4 years old? I used to be 4 years old. How many of you remember what you got for your 4th birthday? I do, because I got the most perfect, amazing, special present that you can ever get if you're 4 years old and a girl. I got a tiara. And my tiara was so special because it was covered with diamonds and rubies and pearls. And my tiara was so special that I knew it made me special too. And my grandmother made me a princess dress to go with my tiara. And I wore my tiara everywhere. I wore it to the park, and I wore it on errands with my grandpa, and I wore it when I took a bath. And I would have worn it to bed, but my mother said no. And I practiced being a princess. I would walk around my kingdom, the backyard, surveying my subjects, remembering to be unfailingly polite and kind, because that's what princesses do when they have their tiara on. And then one day my sister, who is older than I am and knows everything, told me that my tiara really wasn't special, that it wasn't made with real diamonds and rubies and pearls, that it was just plastic. And I didn't even know what plastic was, but I knew it wasn't good. And she said, furthermore, because she used words like that, she said, furthermore, you're not a real princess, and you will never be a real princess. Because to be a real princess, your daddy has to be king, and our daddy is not king, he's just a dentist. And everyone knows that dentists never get to be king. And I knew that she was right, and I was very sad. But when I was 7 years old, and I knew a lot more than when I was 4, I had figured out there was a way I could be a real princess. In fact, I could be better than a real princess. I didn't have to have my daddy be king. All I had to do was marry a king. And then you got to be something even better than a princess. You got to be queen. And everyone knows that queens wear real tiaras. And so I began to practice being queen. And I enlarged my kingdom to the front yard as well. And then one day my sister, who knows everything, informed me that I was never going to be a real queen, because everyone knew that real queens have to be the most beautiful in the realm. And I was never going to be pretty enough to be a real queen. And once more, I was sad. But when I was 9 years old, I watched the Miss America pageant. And when they crowned Miss America got a real tiara. And Miss America got more than, oh, I like that. There's a monitor here. Miss America got a real tiara, and Miss America got a gold sash. and someone to help her put it on. And they handed her flowers that she carried like this. And a man sang as she walked down that runway. And I thought, when I grow up, I want to be Miss America, because I'll get a real tiara and flowers and a sash, and someone's going to sing as I walk in the room. And then my sister, who knows everything, informed me that I was never going to be Miss America, because everyone knew that Miss America had to know how to sing or dance or twirl a baton, and I didn't know how to do any of those things. And furthermore, because she still used words like furthermore, I knew that to be Miss America, you had to be tall and thin, and I was never going to be tall or thin. And I knew that she was right. But when I got older, I read the Bible. And I learned that my daddy is king. King of the universe, not just king of a little kingdom. And that someday my daddy was going to give me, now the Bible says crown, but I know it really means tiara. And it's going to be made of real diamonds and rubies and pearls, not plastic. And my daddy doesn't care if I'm tall enough or thin enough, or if I know how to twirl a baton, because my daddy already thinks I'm special enough. I love stories, as you can tell. That was a children's story that I told at our church one time. And can I keep this on? I really do. Besides, if I take it off, my hair will be all messed up, right? And people tuning in right now are going to go, why is that woman wearing a tiara? No, I'll take it off. There. It's just me. How many of you don't actually have to raise your hand because it might be embarrassing. How many of you remember what your pastor talked about last week? A few of you do. Wow. Wow. Occasionally I do, and it's not the fault of my pastor. He's wonderful. Young enough to be my son, but he's wonderful. How many of you remember the children's story? We remember stories, don't we? At least I do. I sometimes pay way more attention to the children's story than I do, because during the sermon sometimes my mind wanders off, or I'm busy looking up a text that he just mentioned, and by the time I find it, he's on to something else. I can lose track during a sermon. And even though it was a really good sermon, a few days later, I might really have to think, what was that? But stories we remember, because stories get to us on more than one level. Not just our brains, but our emotions as well. They touch our hearts. Why do you think Jesus used so many stories? Jesus told so many stories, his disciples actually asked him one time, why do you do that? Now, I'm a fairly good storyteller, but there is no way that you folks would ever forget that you hadn't eaten because I was telling such wonderful stories. You know, I can't make myself forget that I've not eaten. He could hold an audience of kids and adults and have them on his every word, absorbing his messages, absorbing these stories, to the point that they forgot to eat lunch, forgot to take a lunch. They were so excited about going to hear him. Jesus knew how to reach us, didn't he? And there are stories that have changed my life, just as those stories he told about everyday things. He was talking to farmers, fishermen. You know, yes, he had Pharisees. Those were the university men. But often they weren't understanding the stories. The regular people were going, oh, yeah, I lost a coin one time. Boy, you know, I know exactly what that woman was going through looking for it. And they would mull those stories over as they walked home. First story that I remember absolutely changing my life, Old Testament, the daughters of Zelophehad. You're probably, yes, you are sitting there going, daughters of Zelophehad? I missed that one somewhere. You have to understand why that story impacted me. I'm sitting, Lodi Academy, sitting in Bible class, and the teacher was having us read this story, which up until that time I'd never heard of either. I had a real chip on my shoulder when it came to the Bible, because the Bible did things that irritated me. The Bible would tell you how many camels, how many sheep, how many donkeys were on this trip, and then they'd mention, oh yeah, and there are women and children too. This was the 70s. I know I'm dating myself right there. I was in high school at the height of women's lib. My dad would refer to me as women's lip. And the fastest way to get on my list was to suggest that women were not important. And when I thought of the Bible, my view was, obviously, women didn't count for anything, which meant that, in my head, we probably didn't count for all that much with God either. I wasn't good enough. But the daughters of Zelophehad, these 5 gals, and you have to assume they were relatively young, they weren't married. Their dad had died in the wilderness. The property that was his was going to go to their uncles because their father didn't have any sons. These gals didn't just go, oh, okay, I'm a girl, I guess I don't get to inherit. They went to the big guy. They went to Moses, and they said, this isn't right. And I had to change my thinking about Moses, because Moses didn't just snort and go, yeah, go back to your sewing. We'll call you if we need you. He went to the bigger guy, and he asked, he said, what should I do? And God said, they're right. From then on, women in Israel could inherit, just like their brothers, if there were no brothers. And then later they amended it, well, as long as you marry within the tribe. The tribe didn't want to lose their land. But these were the first women in the Bible that I thought, I would like to have met them. They had some chutzpah. Plus, Moses listened to them. God listened. And I had to think, maybe my view of God, my 16-year-old view of God, isn't perfect. Because when you're 16, you know everything. My sister always knew more, but I was almost knowing everything. And there was a little chink in my armor that day. That story changed the trajectory of my thinking. Another story that changed my life, even though I didn't realize it at the moment, I learned to read when I was 3. And I was, I still read. I have books everywhere. Jan was talking about her books. I can top it, I'm sure. I have books on my phone, in my car, on CD. I have books by my bed. I have books on the kitchen table, because that's the only time sometimes I can read is when you sit down to eat. And I never miss a meal, so I do get to read. And I read voraciously as a child. My grandmother, who lived next door, subscribed to a little magazine called Guideposts that I still subscribe to this day. I loved those stories. And there was one I read, and at the time I had no idea it was going to change my life. Eddie Albert starred on Green Acres. He and his wife were going to be adopting a little girl, and they were in, it was either Spain or Mexico, I forget which one. But they were driving to meet the orphanage director to choose their daughter or their child. And all of a sudden his wife said, wait. And she made him stop the car. She said, how are we going to pick? How are we going to look at all those children and decide which one is coming home with us? So they prayed. Something that, we really should do before major decisions, but often don't do until afterwards. They stopped right there on the side of the road and said, okay, Lord, you know who we need more than we know it ourselves. You know who needs us. We will say yes to the first child the director shows us, no matter what. And then they almost reneged when they saw the first child that the director brought into them, a little 4-year-old girl who looked angry. And they're thinking, oh no, there's got to be a mistake. But they'd made this deal with God, and they followed through. And he was writing this story 20 years later on the eve of her wedding and talking about how God picked the right one. Flash forward now. I wouldn't have known I even remembered that story until my husband and I were in the process of adopting. See, we had 2 sons, both of whom were supposed to be girls. My second son, I knew that he was a girl before I even actually saw anything more than the top of his head. You know, they flipped him over on me. I knew he was a boy because nobody in that delivery room was going to look at me. They were all suddenly so busy. Oh, my. And I said, it's a boy, isn't it? Yeah. And my husband said, yes, I'm sorry. Or, are you too disappointed? And it was like, oh, yeah. If you know my sons, you know that we, especially the second one, even when he went off to academy, he called me every night. You know, I'm so close to my boys. But I still wanted a girl. And I was not willing to just have another baby. My husband is one of 4 boys who are all supposed to have been girls. And I could see the handwriting on the wall. So it was like, no, we are getting the real, I want a guarantee. So we were adopting, and we applied for a Chinese baby. My husband was insistent, if you're adopting, you want as young as possible. Fine, Chinese infant. And somewhere in the process, I remembered this story. And I told my husband about it. Now, I know full well now that God brought that story back, because how many stories can you remember that you read when you were probably 8 years old? We made the same deal. We said, all right, Lord, you know who we need, who needs us. We didn't get a Chinese baby. We got a call from our social worker about a little Ethiopian girl, yay tall, that nobody even knew how old she was. And we had to guess. I don't know, how old did she look to you? The orphanage thought she was about 4. Once she got here, our dentist said she's 6 or 7, but she was wearing a size 4 toddler. It was hard to look at her and say, that's 7 years old? So we split the difference, made her 5. And the advantage is she can lie about her age the rest of her life, and nobody can call her on it. We made that deal. We didn't tell our social worker, but when she called, and she was talking fast, because it was like she did not want to allow me time, a pause long enough to say, no, we want a baby, and no, we want Chinese. I just wanted female. And I kept saying yes. You know, oh, that's fine. She goes, well, do you want a picture? Do you want to talk to your husband? And I said, picture would be lovely. I will mention it to my husband. But the answer is yes, because I knew we'd already said, first one. And she is technically 27 now. And I can tell you that God knows how to pick the right one. There are people who sometimes tell me, oh, you've done such a good job with Aaliyah. She's such a lovely person. I say, no, she came that way. God kept me from messing her up too badly. So that story, those are just 2 examples of stories that changed my life. And I know that you all, we could be here all day and into tomorrow if I asked you how many of you have had your life changed by a story that someone told. It's why Jesus told them. You know, I tell most of my storytelling is done through drama. I love taking stories of women in the Bible and bringing them to life. I really prefer more obscure ones, like I do Peter's mother-in-law. We have 2 verses about her. She was sick, and then he healed her and she got up and started feeding everyone. That's the extent. But I began imagining, what would it be like having Peter for a son-in-law? You know? And for some odd reason, I do her modern. I could picture this Jewish mother-in-law. You know, wait till you hear what happened to me. You know? And she talks about this jerk that her daughter brought home, because it's mostly a story of him. I love using my imagination to make these women real, because they were real. The Bible is full of not just lists of rules. He could have done that. In fact, if I can find it here, let me read you something. Not a quote from me. The brilliance of Jesus was his ability to tell the truth in a story. He spoke and was the Word of God, and certainly could have presented it in any manner he chose. He could have carved a few new tablets of rules. He could have spoken as an educator, giving lessons. Treat your neighbors kindly. Forgive others. God loves you no matter what you do. Heaven is a place where God's justice is realized. Instead, he painted pictures with words. There was a man going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. A man had 2 sons. There was a rich man who dressed in purple garments. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed. I am the good shepherd. Jesus certainly understood the power of an image to convey not just a fact, but an emotion, not just a concept, but a reality. And I like to think that that's what I help do when I do drama. I would be remiss if I didn't admit that there's another side. There are people who think, and have occasionally asked me, why do you do a drama in church? Is that really appropriate? And God stops my mouth, just like he stopped the lions' mouths. I wish he would do it a little more often. But usually I understand where they're coming from, especially if you've grown up in the Adventist church and are of a certain age. Drama of any kind was lumped right in with Hollywood and movies and everything. And there is no question that Hollywood, the movie industry, has not exactly promoted good values. I understand how you can get caught up in all the wrong things, have all the wrong priorities. But there is such power in drama. Jesus used drama. Do you think that he was holding people's attention way past lunchtime if he didn't understand drama? He might not have been wearing a costume. He might not have had props, but he understood painting pictures, helping people visualize and feel and be in the story, not just listening to facts. They have their place, but I believe drama also has its place. There's a quote from Ellen White, and it's the one that is usually used, about the dangers. Here, I found it. I have to explain, on the way here, we were like 2 hours up the road. My friend Mary was driving, and all of a sudden, I had this moment. She goes, what's wrong? And I realized I had left my brain back in my car in Wairika that had my script and all my seminar notes. And I was imagining everything that could happen if I had to totally wing it this weekend. And thank God for fax machines and friends who remember them. And few phone calls, and they faxed my stuff to me. But it's a little fuzzy, and I dropped it once this morning already because I was so it's like, is it in the right order? But I found the quote here. Satan works through drama, has worked through drama for ages to excite passion and glorify vice. And it's true. It absolutely is true. You look at Hollywood. But in that same section, she talks about card games and the opera. So the next time you're enjoying a Puccini aria, imagine, Ellen White actually spoke against opera and what it can do to our emotions. But that's using that medium in the wrong way. I don't think it's the medium itself, because she also attended a Christmas pageant that her little granddaughter was in, and she wrote a letter to a friend. She had a little criticism for the Christmas pageant, but not because they had on costumes and were acting out the story. She said, if they had spent a little more time and money on better costumes and backdrops, it would have had an even greater impact. So it isn't drama itself, storytelling itself, that I believe is the issue. It's how are you using it? Because Jesus knew how to use imaginations. He gave us our imaginations. He knows that as long as there have been humans, there have been stories and that would get passed on. So I don't think the issue is just drama or just, not even just fiction. One of my favorite writers is C.S. Lewis. My sister did her master's degree in Lewis. She wouldn't let me take her class. And yeah, I heard you say that. I thought it was because she wouldn't want to grade my papers.
Is this the sister that knew everything?
Yes, and still does. Okay, you think I'm exaggerating? Okay. I'm the secretary registrar at Wairika Adventist Christian School, right? That is the pinnacle of my career. My sister is chief science editor for the National Institutes of Health in Washington, D.C. Yeah. You try growing up with that. Is it any wonder that I grew up pathologically insecure? I do have a tiara. I do. Now I don't even know where I get off on a blonde moment and can't remember where I am. Oh, Ellen White, another little quote that I just saw here. Ellen White, another quote that you can tell people. She was talking about the need to use different new methods, and she actually said we need to break in and surprise people. So I think I would have liked her. But back to C.S. Lewis. I am such a fan of Lewis, I actually know what the CS stands for. Anyone else? Clive Staples Lewis. I can't remember important things like what I went to the grocery store for, but I can remember what C.S. Lewis stands for. He had some of the same criticism because if you know him, he wrote the Chronicles of Narnia. And he wrote others like the Out of the Silent Planet and Paralandra. He wrote fiction, Christian fiction. And he had people ask, he was an Oxford University Don, and he had people say, why do you stoop to writing fairy tales? But he thought they were the most important. And I love the way he described it. He says, people have prejudices. You've run into this. You even start talking about anything related to God, and they shut down. You get the polite smile, and okay, good to see you, I'm busy. You know, they are not letting anything that you have to say get past those barriers. And Lewis said he likened them to watchful dragons that people post, like around their castle, the castle of their minds. And he said, if we package Christian principles in a new way, in a story, might we not get past those watchful dragons? A few years ago, Milo Academy was doing, I think it had to have been the mother of all community outreach projects. And they were having an entire weekend of community service. They had projects lined up that students and faculty and people, Adventists in the community, could sign up for. They were doing a full-blown church service and program in the park in town that day. And the committee were going, what can we have that would draw people in? Someone's just walking their dog and they hear music, you know, they might stop by, but you don't want a sermon per se. What can we do? And so they called me and had me come and do one of my monologues. And I chose Noah that time. The story, I do it as Noah's wife because I can't pull off being Noah. You know, I'm good, but not that good. Because I thought everybody, even if you are unchurched, even if you've never opened a Bible, most people, at least from nursery wallpaper or something. They know Noah and the ark and all the little animals. So that would be something that almost everyone could relate to. And I will not know until the kingdom, probably, if anybody really was there that day that wasn't part of the project. I don't wear my glasses when I perform, so in a way it's thankful. My audience, they're just these little blobs. You don't really exist. I can pretend that you're not staring at me. So I don't know the crowd that was there for sure. But I had an opportunity through drama, through telling a story, to maybe plant a seed. Draw someone in who wouldn't have been drawn to go over and hear what that guy in a suit was saying, but who might have come to see, what is that lady doing? She's all dressed, in this costume, and she's telling a story. And they might have paused to listen, and by listening, heard the message that there's another storm coming, and you need to decide, are you going to be in the ark or out? Planting seeds is something that telling stories does, and that's what we're asked to do. Most of us, all we can do is plant seeds and pray that someone else maybe comes along and does the watering. Sometimes you get lucky enough to be the whole farmer, and you have a friend or an acquaintance, and you get to plant the seed and help it, grow and nurture it and be there for the harvest. But a lot of times you really have no idea the effect that you might have had, or the effect that a story you've told might have had. I've always wished that I had a really, really good story, personal story. I'm loving listening to Jennifer, but I like the testimonies. Oh, she is here. No, I like you the best. I love the testimonies. I love people's stories, hearing what they've been through, how they got from here to here. I love those stories, and I've always thought, I don't have anything dramatic. I've always described. I mean, I was never, I was never an alcoholic, never done drugs. I've never smoked a cigarette. I was, that young woman who was talking about, always doing everything right. That was me. I never got out of line very far. And I described myself one time as being very vanilla. Say, our family, we're just, plain vanilla. And my daughter, who's Ethiopian, she does this great thing that I don't know if they do that in Ethiopia or if that was learned. And she said, really? Vanilla? She said, at the very least, we are chocolate ripple. But she opened my eyes because I realized, what am I saying? I don't have a story. Anybody who's met Christ has a story. I may not have, hit bottom and been in prison and Christ, got through to me, but we all have a story. And it dawned on me, because of Christ, I am not my mother. My mother lived her life in such a way that by the time she died, my brother, my sister, and I had all, at different times, I was the last holdout, come to the conclusion that we could simply not have her in our lives. And we hadn't spoken to her. When I got married and I invited my brother and asked him to walk me down the aisle, because our dad died when I was still in high school, he said yes. He's a lot older than I am, and I love to remind him. And I said, now, Mom will be at my wedding. Does that change your answer? I wasn't sure he'd come to my wedding if Mom was there. At that time, I still was talking to her, still had a bit of a relationship, but he had left for college, and that was it. My sister was not too far after him. He came, he behaved himself for the weekend. For me, nicest thing he's ever done is the fact that he came to my wedding knowing Mom would be there. by the time she died, I'm ashamed to admit it, I truly am. I haven't spoken to her in 3 years. And we had moved her to Wairika. She was in town. My younger son was 9 years old when he told me, I'm not going back to visit Grandma anymore. And I said, oh, yes, you are, because I take you boys with me because you're the buffers. I can't go see her by myself. And so I forced him to still go a little bit. But that's the kind of woman she was. When your 9-year-old grandson makes the decision, I don't even want to ever see her again. I don't like Grandma. So I look at my mom, and I recognize what's in me. Because genetically and environmentally, I should be like her. There is no reasonable explanation for why I am still happily married. 40 years, which is also dating me, I know. I was a child bride. You know, it probably wasn't even legal. I was so young. Not only have I been married 40 years, we still like each other. You know, I first of all made a very good decision and married a good man, an actual adult male. They exist. But I have children, 3 adult children, who still adore me. They like me. They don't come to visit just because, oh, haven't seen Mom in a year, I guess we should go for Thanksgiving. They like me. I can't get rid of all of them. The younger one, who's married, has 3 little girls in less than 4 years. Moved back to Wairika because both sets of grandparents are there. Our oldest moved back home and is still there. He's not married. He's got potential, so if you have any candidates, I'll take your name. And currently, our daughter also moved back home. She was starting a business, and it just made more sense to live at home. So I still have my children around me on purpose. They like being there. That was not the guide I had growing up. A happy marriage, good relationships. I wear bangs, not only because Candace Bergen said after you turn 50, bangs are a girl's best friend, but it also covers up a little scar up here at the hairline. My parents were having a discussion, and an egg beater aimed at my dad hit me instead. And my sister pretty much thanked me for taking one for the team. It ended the argument. You know, they had to take me to the ER to get stitched up. That's the kind of family I grew up in. Looked really good on the outside. My dad was a dentist. But inside it was just chaotic. My mother had issues with prescription drugs. I can look at our family tree, and we have addictions in our family. There's no good reason for why I'm not an alcoholic or a prescription drug addict. She never drank because she was too good an Adventist to drink. But you could have half a dozen doctors who didn't know about each other because that was okay. The doctor gave it to me. But it was like living with an alcoholic. So this is the family I grew up in. Nobody who really knew my family back in Lodi would have said, oh yeah, Janice is going to go far. She's going to be one of the, pillars of the church when she grows up. Good family. They were all probably praying for me. I'm sure that's one of the reasons that I'm here and that I'm relatively okay. My sister, who knows everything, wrote a memoir a few years ago and sent me a copy. And I knew she'd be asking me what I thought of it. And I had it on my kitchen counter, and I'd walk past kind of like that because I didn't know what stories she'd told in there or how I was going to come off looking. Finally, I read it. And at first I thought, oh, I hope nobody ever reads this. I do not want people to know what a crazy family I came from, just how bad it was. But then I changed my mind, and I thought, no, I need everybody I know to read this, because they'll go from thinking, yeah, Janice is a little crazy, to read the book, and then they'd go, considering the family she came from, she is functioning really well. So now an example. I have a story. I knew I was headed somewhere here. I'll tell you a story that shows one of those moments when you realize, oh, there's a glimpse of who I was destined to be without God. Boys were little. I think they were 3 and 6. And it was one of those days where 10 in the morning I still hadn't showered. And they had messed up the entire family room, which was okay. It's why I was so glad we had a family room. But they had also taken over the kitchen and the dining room and the living room. It's like I didn't even know what room to start with. And I finally said, boys, I'm going to go upstairs. I'm going to take a shower. Just stay out of my way for long enough to let me get together. And then we're going to clean up. So I went upstairs, took my shower. I'm blind without my glasses. Opened the bathroom door, stepped out, and in the interim, they had followed the letter of my little request and had left me alone. But they had decided being downstairs while Mommy was upstairs was a little too far. So they moved all of their toys and junk into my bedroom. And I stepped on a Lego. And you know the special pain of stepping on a Lego. And I lost it. I truly lost it. And I began to yell at them and the Lego. And first of all, I threw the Lego. And then I began just picking up and throwing their toys out the door into the hall. And it was, get these things out of my bedroom. And I picked up a G.I. Joe and hurled him. And he hit the wall. And his little arms went ping. And his little legs did the same. And his head went ping. And the three of us just stood there for a moment. Because I had this thought, oh, that might have gone a little too far. And my older son, who's not married, absolutely Gerber baby beautiful, blonde, blue-eyed, could have been a model. He's staring at me. His eyes are huge. And in that, there's this moment of silence. And before I can say anything, now in my family, that would not have been my fault. It would have been their fault. But God already was keeping me from saying anything that would make them feel any worse. Like, I wouldn't have done that if it weren't for you. I just shut up. And my sweet little 6-year-old son looked at me and said, and you call yourself a Christian? Not my finest mother moment. I took a deep breath. And I said, yes, Colin, I do. Just imagine what Mommy would be like if she weren't. And his eyes got bigger. Because we all realized if Mommy did not have Christ, I would be murdering G.I. Joes every day. It wouldn't be, just one of those outlier experiences. That would be me every day. Hurling egg beaters aimed at my dad that would hit me instead. And I thought, literally, if it weren't for Christ, I would be my mother because I have the ability. It's in there. The anger, the bitterness, the making everyone around you hurt so that you hurt less. And I realized we all have that story. The problem is I don't think enough of us are telling stories. We still like to pretend we're okay, but a funny thing happened when I began to stop pretending that I was okay and started actually talking about the fact that there have been a handful of periods in my life where I have not functioned properly. One time I was on meds before I could get functioning properly. When I began admitting that I have moments where I murder G.I. Joes, other people, instead of going, oh, I can't be her friend anymore, she has issues, I began hearing, oh, really? I've been there. And not only did telling my story, simple stories like the G.I. Joe story, which actually is kind of funny after you let enough years go by, it affects other people because they might be right where you were in that G.I. Joe moment. And they're wondering how to stop being like that. Or they're not coping with life right now, and they're wondering how to get help, or is there any life beyond? Is there any light beyond this? So telling my stories not only helped other people, I began to realize it was helping me and growing my faith. I think that we need to tell more stories, not just, children's stories, like the Miss America. That has a good point, but honest stories. If we're going to grow and if we're going to help our sisters grow. I'm going to leave you with one last story. And then I had someone say, so you're going to tell us how to tell better stories? And I realized, no, mostly I'm just going to talk about the power of stories. But I brought 2 handouts that I put together. One of them is on ways to incorporate drama into ministry with a few resources. There are so many. In this age of Google, you can find anything you want. And Google has saved my life many times. And then I have another handout that is on tips for telling better stories. And in the story I started out with, some of them are on there using repetition, especially if you're talking to children. You have a phrase, a word, something that repeats throughout. It helps them hold on to the story. So I knew that once I got up here and was talking that I would never remember everything. I have these. My lovely assistant, Mary, can help pass them out. Yes, I do.
I'll be your van.
Our daughter, when she arrived, she spoke no English. Her first language is Amharic. And we did a lot of the, time to brush your teeth. It was like living with Helen Keller at first, because I don't speak Amharic. And so the first few months were fun. One day, it was summer. She arrived in February. This was summer. I remember because it was hot. And it was Sabbath afternoon. I'm lying on the couch reading, and I can hear that she's upstairs, and she is playing praise music, children's praise music CDs. And I can hear the music, and then I hear the music stop. And Aaliyah came down the stairs, and she was singing one of the songs that she had just been listening to. Now remember, she is learning English with the help of her 2 big brothers, who were 11 and 14 when she arrived. And the younger one took special joy in teaching her words, but telling her the wrong definition, and thought that was funny. Plus, she's deaf in one ear and doesn't always hear, words exactly right. So she comes downstairs and she's singing. A zombie, Jesus wants me for a zombie. I fell off the couch laughing when I realized what she was singing. And then she was real. I got this. It came that early. She'd only been here a few months, and she was very upset because she thought her singing was beautiful. And when I could finally talk without having a paroxysm of giggles again, I said, honey, Jesus doesn't want us to be zombies. Jesus wants us to be sunbeams. They're light and they're warm. And I got the eye roll because she had never heard of a sunbeam, but her brothers had told her all about zombies. And she wasn't buying this whole sunbeam thing. But that story, I was telling friends about it because I just thought it was so hysterically funny. But I got to thinking, how often am I a zombie for Jesus? And I told this story as a children's story in church when she was a teenager. Oh, it's special when you can get back at your teenagers. Yeah. Because I said, how often are we zombies for Jesus? We look at least semi-alive, but we're dead inside. It's an illusion. And I've come to realize that as I've gotten more honest and I'm willing to tell stories that aren't just funny, but are actually honest about where I've really been, where I am, where I'm hoping to go, that we grow. And I'm less of a zombie. Telling my story has made me less of a zombie. And if you don't want to be a zombie for Jesus, you need to go home and be telling stories. Whether it's something where you can say, you know, I read this story in the Bible that reminded me of this situation you're going through, or whether it is your own personal story. And I hope that you start sharing that, because it's the only witness we have, or at least it's the greatest witness we have. Who would you be if you didn't have Jesus Christ? Because I know you've gotten glimpses, you've had your G.I. Joe moments. So I want you, when you leave here, to know that there is power in stories, and to be more willing to tell them. To think, Jesus didn't just preach, he was telling stories about the kingdom of God, about how to be a good neighbor. And we need to use his techniques and reach people on a heart level and not just an intellectual level. So I hope you will remember the power of stories and don't ever discount the power that's in your own story. Amen. Thank you. She was asking about any adjustments to adopting. And oh, yes, especially when it's not a tiny baby, but this little girl that doesn't speak English. And frankly, after Aaliyah's arrival, was one of the deepest, I can't really call it postpartum depression because I didn't give birth to her. I had serious issues after the births of both of our sons, hormones just, everywhere. And I thought, oh, I'll sail right through this one because no hormones are involved. But I had just as black. And it's a good thing that my husband and our sons just bonded with her. My sons, you'd think one of them was adopted. They're so different. Colin is 5'3". Takes after an uncle I have and my grandfather. Lauren is 6 feet tall, built like a linebacker. And when they were 2 and 5, Lauren was already bigger than Colin. And I remember our social worker, very delicately, because we're from Siskiyou County, Wairika. Truly, it's fairly redneck. And she said, now boys, someday, what are you going to do if you have a friend who maybe teases you because your sister isn't the same color as you? And the big one, Lauren, said, they'll only do it once. And she decided, okay, we're not going to have any problems here in this family. And truly, the community, the church, we have the most wonderful church. I know you all think your church is the most wonderful, but it just means you haven't been to Wairika. But the adjustments were really just, it's like if you imagine a mobile, you add a new element to a mobile and everything kind of goes whoops for a while. But then very quickly, it was like, what was life without her? And honestly, Aaliyah and I are so close. I can't imagine being more attached if I had actually given birth to her myself. And I absolutely forget, I grew up, my grandmother kept foster kids and we had foster kids. And so we always had kids in and out, and they weren't all white or all the same. We had Down syndrome, one good thing about my family is that there was quite a bit of diversity just in the family. My brother has 2 daughters, both adopted. One of them is Vietnamese. My husband has a brother, and they have an adopted, she's actually Inuit. So blended family, it just doesn't even matter. And it's never, seriously, never been a problem. And it is so nice sometimes to be able to go, well, obviously, whatever trait that I don't like right there, that was your birth parents, because you did not get that from me. So it's a wonderful excuse where with the boys, usually I can go, oh, shoot, you got that from me, and I have to cop to it. But I would highly recommend, if there's anyone, if you know someone contemplating adoption, it's like we could be the poster family. But again, we let God pick. I was so afraid that I said, what are we going to do, honey, if they show us a catalog? This is when I remembered that story from Guideposts. I said, what if they show us a catalog with all these, little headshots? And I said, I'll just pick the cutest one. I'm that shallow. And God brought that story to mind. And after that, it was like, okay, well, you're going to pick. And people who know her can tell you. Yeah, if you believed in karma, I would be wondering what this poor girl did in her life to deserve us. But she has been just a tremendous blessing. And I love telling stories about her, especially the ones that embarrass her.
I'm going to just interrupt because we need to have a prayer for Aaliyah because she has a tumor in her brain.
Oh, I wasn't going to tell that story.
I know. See, there's a lot of stories we don't tell.
We have no idea what her medical history is, but yes, she has a pituitary tumor, and thankfully non-cancerous. That was my first question. But she had gained 50 pounds for no reason, and hormones. She ceased having her menstrual cycle, and now she's on meds that are helping, but they're causing other issues. And her neurosurgeon said, you're probably going to be infertile the rest of your life. And we were there in his office, and I just turned to her and said, well, at least we believe in adoption. It'll be fine. But that would be wonderful. We should have a prayer to close anyway. So.
She's like a daughter to me, too.
This is my friend Mary, and partner in crime and co-director and everything. So, yes, if you'd close with prayer.
Father in heaven, we just thank you for this awesome opportunity to share one story. Oh, right. And our hearts, our lives, our families, you are the center of our universe, and you need to be the center so that when we're going through these storms, Lord, you are guiding us. You help us to reach out to one another. In our church family, there's people that are outside our church family that need a church family. Help us to take off our blinders so that we can see another's pain and share our stories, Lord. Right now, we want to lift up Aaliyah's tumor to you. And only you know where that's going to go. But we ask for your peace. We ask for your confidence that you will walk us through whatever comes our way. So we ask for a special prayer that you would shrink that tumor, Lord. That's our greatest wish. But you will guide us. We know that. And there's a lot of people hurting here, and we lift them up, whatever there's on their heart right now. In Jesus' name, amen.